All right, so our second speaker is Dan Ross. Dan is a health certified master practitioner of neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, and a hypnotherapist. He has been coaching people for over 20 years. He's a member of Integrated Healing Arts in Palo Alto and maintains a hypnotherapy practice in San Jose. His programs for groups and individuals have helped hundreds of people reduce stress and anxiety, lose weight, stop smoking, become happier, and improve their health. His specialty is doing deep work with clients to clear limiting beliefs and resolve unconscious inner conflicts to facilitate healing. So please welcome Dan.
Thank you. Welcome. So we heard about the physiology side earlier, and today, and when I'm talking, we're going to talk about the mental side of healing. And I know I'm probably not going to seem like I'm too weird if I say the mind-body relationship here. So this will be the mind part of the mind-body relationship and the role of the mind in healing the body. And because of what Dr. Chi was talking about earlier, I'm going to put some special emphasis today on healing and recovering from major dis-ease, and I'll talk about dis-ease and what that means in terms of beliefs. So, welcome everybody, and so what we're going to talk about tonight is mind-body work with health issues, and again about deeper health issues and what somebody has to do in their mind in order to help them heal. We'll talk about the structure of thoughts, because our thoughts can create our experience. And you'll actually have, this will be a little more interactive, you'll actually have an experience tonight around what it means to actually change your thoughts. Because people say change your thoughts, well, often people don't know how, and you'll actually learn that tonight. There are different neurological levels that we can make changes in that can go from less deep to more deep. And I will explain a model for that, and you get a little bit of an experience of that. We'll talk about limiting beliefs and internal conflicts, and this is really the meat of the work that I do, because often by the time somebody has come to me or by the time somebody has had a deep diagnosis, you're beyond sort of behavioral change. We're into the deeper kind of work that people need to have in order to make a change and heal. I'll present a couple of case studies and do some demonstrations and take a couple questions. So, how many people are familiar with placebo studies? Yeah, so a lot of people. And by the way, how many people here would say if you're a healer that you work more on the physical side of healing, more of a physician, naturopath, something like that? And how many work more on the mental side of it? Both. And how many do both? Awesome. You don't need to be here, by the way, but thank you. So there's a number of placebo studies that are out there. I'm sure there are many more we could cite, but I like this particular one that I'm going to talk about first, because for people that had enough pain that they needed morphine, they split the people into two groups, and one group was given morphine for their pain, and another group was given a placebo, and about half responded just as well to the placebo as they did to the morphine. So I know we're not here in the business of prescribing placebos, but what do we take from the placebo effect? It's that if I give you something and you believe that it's going to work, that it will still have that effect. And so that points to the mind part of the mind-body. And there's another study, alcohol versus placebo, again, same sort of thing. This was just done in a social setting with college students. I guess didn't have to convince them too hard to come in and drink some alcohol. But again, split them into two groups, and half got the alcohol and half didn't. And in this study, about half responded the same way to the placebo as it did the alcohol. So one of the more interesting studies, this was more of a survey study, but they had taken they had 100 cancer patients who had been given a diagnosis of terminal cancer and whose prognosis was poor. And they followed up with them 10 years later for the people that lived, and they were trying to figure out what was it that had these people live after giving this terminal diagnosis. And they were kind of racking their brains. They couldn't figure out what it was because some people got chemo, some people got radiation, some people had surgery. So there were a bunch of different treatment options, and that was what they were trying to find is like, oh, chemo will do it or radiation will do it. But what they found from the study 10 years later was the people that were given the treatment believed the treatment would work. And so, again, we don't want to prescribe placebos, but we want to set this response expectancy that if I give you this pill that you believe that it will work, or I give you this treatment that it will work. It doesn't negate any of the physical healing that's going to be done, but you don't want somebody to come in and get a treatment and not believe it's going to work. So when somebody comes to me, we are working with helping them believe that they're going to heal. And it's not giving them false hope, because sometimes I have to work with them around beliefs around what does it mean if you don't heal, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So when we're working with the mind, we want to look at what the actual structure of the mind is, and the mind not being the brain, but the actual mind. And a model for this comes from a science called Neuro-Linguistic programming. So Neuro-Linguistic programming, or NLP, started about 40 years ago around here, and it started as models of excellence. There were models of healing, and the first models that they used were people who were, they were great therapists. So they're able to communicate very well with people and affect change in them. And some of the models they had, one was, the first one was Fritz Perls, the founder of Gestalt therapy. And the second one they had was Dr. Milton Erickson, who was a famous, he was originally a psychiatrist and medical doctor, and he became very well known for being a hypnotherapist who could work miracles on people that couldn't heal in any other way. And he worked on mental, emotional problems and physical problems. And then another one was Virginia Satir, who was a famous family therapist. So there were these founders of NLP were modeling what is it that creates the difference. And they wanted to know how these people were communicating very specifically. Because one can look at how someone is communicating and make certain deductions, but something as simple as a cock of an eye or touching a client or something like that, they were like, well, why did you do that? So for example, with Virginia Satir, she would reach over and touch a client, and they would just think, oh, she's reassuring them, like some people might think that. And so the modelers were trying to find out, well, what was she doing? And she was actually creating an association between that touch and a certain state of mind that that person was in. So, for example, in a family setting, if there was a husband and a wife there, she would elicit a loving state from the wife, for example, and then touch, which would be what we call an anchor. It creates a Pavlovian association. So you could go back and touch her again and bring that state of loving towards her husband. So they were looking at these very fine communications. And so the model says that everything that we've experienced has come in through one of our five senses. So metaphysics aside, if we look at the physical world, everything that we've ever experienced has come in through something that we've seen, we've heard, we've felt, we've touched, or we've tasted. And then it becomes a memory, and so when you bring that memory up again, you represent it in your mind, you re-present it. So you make some representation of it that is likely different than the original event. And that's where people get into problems sometimes, because one person can look at the world one way and one person can look at the world another way, and it's because they have a different image in their mind or they heard it differently or something like that. So this is the top level of the structure of thought, which is everything comes in through one of the senses, you represent it in your mind some way, and then you represent it. So the modalities are visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, gustatory. That's how it comes in. And then you have a sub-modality, a layer below that of how you represent it. And so if you think about a memory that you have, and if you think about it visually, you might have an image in your mind. It could be a picture, it could be a movie, it could be something like that. And how somebody represents that will give them a very different experience depending upon how it is, right? So I'll give you a little bit of a demo of this. So we'll do a couple little demos here. And so for this one, we want to measure it first. And what we're going to do is we're going to take something that is memory. We're going to manipulate the submodality of it. We'll manipulate the picture in your mind, and this won't hurt a bit. And then we'll see what happens with it. And it's always fascinating to see how people respond to it. So I like to measure things. So when a client comes in, let's say they have anxiety, I like to say on a scale of 0 to 10, what is your anxiety level when you come in, right? And it might be an 8. And I want to know, okay, by the end of the session, I want that to be a 3 or a 4 or a 2 or a 0. I don't want it to be a 9, certainly, or a 10. And a 6 would be okay. But, if you're really going for it, then it's nice to have it half, right? So if you were to think of a mildly unpleasant experience, and I want it to be no more than a 5, right? So it could be somebody cut you off on the freeway. It could be that a clerk didn't pay attention to you in the store. I mean, something that's mildly unpleasant, no more than a 5, probably more than a 1 because you want to know that there's some change. So think about something like that, some kind of mildly negative experience. And for many of you, it'd be good to close your eyes and just raise your hand when you have one. Okay, give everybody a moment. Okay, almost everybody has one. And note what number that is on your scale of 0 to 10, where 10 is really yucky and 0 is neutral. And now for the visual part of it, and with your eyes closed, for the visual part of it, notice, is it a movie or is it a still picture? And if it's a movie, turn it into a still picture. And notice what happens to it. I heard one reaction. And then if it's 3D, turn it into 2D. And then what I want you to do is allow it to begin to move away from you. Move it further and further away, allow it to move further and further away. And then make it smaller, make it darker. And then just notice what happens to your experience of it. For most people, usually that number has gone down a certain amount. And if it's okay, you can leave it there. And if there's some reason that it might need to move back, that's okay. But leave it wherever it feels the least yucky, that's appropriate. And then when you're ready, you can open your eyes. Okay, so for how many people did their number go down? So that's probably 80-90% of the room. Fascinating, isn't it? Right? This is the programming of your mind. So let's bring this back to health, right? So if somebody gets a diagnosis, often the first thing they do is they make it into a big, nasty movie right in front of them of not usually a good prognosis, right? How many know what I'm talking about, right? Even the thought of it, right? So when I work with people that have anxiety, there's a structure to anxiety. And I even tell people when they come in for a consultation, this is probably what you're doing in your mind. This is how anxiety works. And I remember a really dramatic example of this. So I had a client who came in, and she was afraid of going into a big box store like a Walmart or Home Depot or something like that. And she just go, oh yeah, when I go in, I feel a panic attack. And I said, oh, I know what she's doing in her mind. And I explained it to her. I said, I'll bet you're making a big picture right in front of you of something bad happening. Right? Because I could see it in her gestures. Because many people believe gestures are just gestures, but they're actually, people are marking out what they're doing in their mind. They might say, well, I got to do this, I got to do this, I got to do this. I'm like, oh, you have 3 pictures. That's how you represent it, right? So she was doing this, and as soon as I said, well, let's move that away from you a little bit, I could see her go like this and just start to relax, right? Because she was imagining like somebody attacking her. Now we had to do some other stuff around that, but I could just start to see that she was starting to relax. So when somebody gets a diagnosis, if they're making a big picture in front of their mind about what that means to them, right, like them, feeling a lot of pain or them dying or something like that, that's one of the first things we have to work on. Often a diagnosis will be traumatic, right? It creates an actual trauma, and people will replay it over and over in their mind. So there's a process we can do to kind of help them move that, push that away. That's actually the structure of PTSD, by the way. PTSD is you step back into the movie and have it happen to you over and over again. You get caught in a loop. So when I work with people that have trauma, we get them out of that, and often, like I work with somebody who had a fall. She'd stepped out in her garage and she had missed, and she came down on her hip. And it hadn't healed after a few weeks, so just over the phone, I was working with her, and we did a process to reverse the trauma to actually take her out of that movie so she wasn't, because she was imagining falling over and over whenever she thought about it. And so that would create the pain would create the movie again, she was stuck in this loop. We broke the loop for her in her mind, again, by changing her pictures, changing her sounds, changing how she represented it. It's kind of like pushing away, but it's a little more complicated process. So after that, actually I think her pain was like a 7 or 8, and after I'd done this process with her, it took about 15 minutes, her pain level was down to a 1 or 2, and then it started healing just fine on its own, because her mind had told her body that it was still happening, so her body didn't have permission for it to actually heal. So once we took the trauma out of it, once we took her out of the movie, her body actually had a chance to heal. So now let's do the reverse of what we did before, because we worked on sort of yucky stuff. So think of a pleasant experience. And then, if it's a still, turn it into a movie. And by the way, just note what it was before I had you do that, what number it was, how pleasant it was, scale of 0 to 10. So if it was still, turn it into a movie. And then move it closer. Don't move it so close that it's overwhelming. You may need to adjust a little bit. But make it close so that it's more compelling, feels better. Make it brighter. Make it 3D if it isn't already. And even imagine just stepping into it. And then there's probably no reason not to leave it there, but adjust it accordingly if you need to before we open your eyes. So go ahead and open your eyes. And for how many people will that become more pleasant? So one of the things I do, and I'll talk about this a bit later, is when somebody's going through a health crisis, often they need a compelling future to drive them forward. So sometimes I get people they've given up, right? Because they don't have something compelling to pull them through that. They don't have a reason to heal. So this is one of the things we can do too, is give them a compelling future. There's a lot more we could do with it, but this is a simple demo of that. Now, on the last slide, we talked about all these different senses, right? So we just did visual. We could do this on auditory. So I have people that come in with negative self-talk. Anybody ever had negative self-talk, right? So there's things we can do to change that too. That's one of the structures I see a lot with depression is you'll never amount to anything. You're worthless. Why did you do that? You can't do anything right? Well, if I had a voice following me around all day saying that, I would probably be depressed too. So we can do things with those voices as well. So we can work on the kinesthetic sense directly. So if somebody has pain, we can work directly on how they're experiencing the pain in their mind. Is it stabbing? Is it burning? Right? Because pain is just a label for a set of experiences that we're having in our mind. I know it's common for people to replace the word pain with the word discomfort. That can take it down a notch. Like imagine if you feel, like how much pain do you feel versus how much discomfort do you feel? So, but we can actually work on the kinesthetic sense of it, right? To make that so that it's not a label. It's a series of processes that people have in their mind, and they can be changed just like we changed those images that we worked on. Don't work too much on olfactory or gustatory unless I'm doing like weight loss. That's often useful for aversion. So if somebody, like I had somebody who loved chips, right? So I had them change the qualities of what the chips felt like in the mouth, because she liked the crunchiness, what they smelled like and what they tasted like. Have her imagine that they were something different than they were. So we can do these a little bit for aversion. Again, don't use these too much otherwise. All right, so final demo. So this will be another eyes closed one. So when you're ready, close your eyes. And I want you to imagine that I've just handed you an orange. Put your hand out, accept the orange. And feel the feeling of the orange in your hand. Feel the texture, it's got little bumps on it. There's the little navel on it. And then lift the orange up to your nose and smell it. Smell that orange goodness. And now imagine you start to peel the orange and feel your fingernails dig into it and let the juice start to get on your nails and your hands as the smell just bursts forward. Now imagine that you start to pull out one of the orange slices and you hold it up above your head and you squeeze the orange and you drizzle it into your mouth and your mouth starts salivating and you can just taste that wonderful orange taste. And just really notice what that feels like in your mouth and what it tastes like, what the texture and smell is. And chew and swallow that orange and really enjoy every bit of that. And then when you're ready, you can put your orange down, your imaginary orange down. You can open your eyes. Okay, so we'll take a little survey. So how many people saw the orange? Raise your hands. Okay, so positive visual hallucination, great. How many people, there isn't much auditory, but how many had any sort of auditory experience like orange? What does it mean by orange? Probably not too many, okay. How many people felt the orange? Okay, almost everybody, excellent. How many people smelled the orange? And how many people tasted the orange? Okay, now here's the kicker. How many people salivated? Okay, so the role of the mind in health, notice that through a description, I did not touch you, I did not do anything. This took about a minute. I activated some of your glands, right, to actually salivate. This is basically what you went through as a hypnotic experience. I didn't bring my watch to swing, but this can work both sides in healing, right? So what are the contributing factors to people? If they have a lot of stress, anxiety, that's creating cortisol and other chemicals that aren't so useful in their mind. By changing how they think, by changing these things, we can lower those levels, right? How many people believe that stress might be a contributing factor to illness? Yeah, so there's one area of the role of the mind. The same thing goes for healing. That may, if somebody has stress or if they have negative thoughts about healing, that's creating chemicals that may be inhibiting the healing. So again, when somebody comes in, they're having all sorts of stuff that's going on, and we want to give them better thoughts, better chemicals, better living through chemistry. So there are different levels that we can work with. And what we just did was more at what we would call a behavioral level. So basically, changing how you see something in your mind can change your behavior. That's the power of visualizations, affirmations, and those work for a lot of people, and sometimes they don't, right? People, how many have ever tried affirmations, right? How many people have gotten every single thing they want from an affirmation? 0. How many people have gotten something from an affirmation? Right, so it works some of the time, other times it doesn't work, so what's the difference? So at the most shallow level, there's the environment. So You can work to change somebody's environment, and sometimes that's powerful, like if somebody lives under power lines and they're having some reaction to that, just moving can help them. But often not, right? If somebody has cancer, them moving from one room of the house to the other room of their house probably isn't going to do too much for them. If somebody can't sing, if I take them, and if they're standing right here, and I say, okay, you can't sing, but go next door, they probably still won't be able to sing. Now, if I take that same person and I say, well, let's teach you the behaviors of singing. So I'm going to teach you how to use your voice, I'm going to teach you how to use your body, or I'm going to send you out for lessons because I don't teach that. But somebody's going to teach you how to use your voice, how to use your physiology to sing. They will teach you scales, they will teach you pitch. Many people will be able to learn how to sing from doing that. You break down something big into a group of small behaviors, and then they can learn it. And when they learn to sing, they will build a capability of singing, which might be able to allow them to have it might be able to allow them to build other behaviors more easily, right? If somebody can sing, so they got to the point where they can sing. If I say, I want you to learn to play piano, they would already understand some of the structure of how music works. They would be able to synergistically use the piano to help them learn to sing better, and singing to help them learn to play the piano better. So this is a higher level of abstraction. When you have capabilities, it's a set of behaviors. So if I'm working with somebody with weight loss, oftentimes what they're trying to do is change a behavior. But there's enough diet information on the internet that we should all be as thin as we want to be, right? So it's not lack of the ability to learn or understand behaviors. It's that there's something deeper going on, and that's belief. So if we go back to the singer example, so if somebody believes they can't sing, no amount of teaching them will get them, because it's like, yeah, well, I really can't do it, so la 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 la, whatever, right? They will not give it their full, because there is a filter inside them that's blocking them from actually doing it. There are special beliefs that we call identity levels. So this is I am not, I can, I can't, right? I am healthy, I am not healthy. If you think about somebody who thinks that they're not healthy, they will probably not do the behaviors or build the capabilities to become healthy. So you can observe these in people, right? I could look at somebody and I could say, oh, they can sing, or they can play piano, or they have the capability for that. I can't usually look at somebody and get their beliefs, although people's beliefs will show up in their demeanor and voice tone and stuff like that, but it's not measurable like these things are. So the key here is to change a belief, you actually have to tap into something at a higher level. So if somebody has a belief, you have to tap into their identity. Like, you're the kind of person who can learn and understand many new things. Or you're an achiever, right? So I can tap into this for weight loss, right? That will motivate them for the behaviors, right? And it's not just saying it, we actually do exercises around that. But often with healing, there's identity level stuff going on, and so we have to go to the highest level, which is something beyond yourself. And for some people, that's a spiritual thing. For some people, it's community. For some people, it's family or kids, right? So if somebody has a health crisis, we want to motivate them with, hey, you need to, what would it be like to be alive for your kid's graduation, right? And that can tap into something much deeper than they might have just thinking about themselves. So a belief is not an opinion, right? An opinion is, I think red cars are better than blue cars, right? So that's kind of how beliefs are defined in our society. But in terms of what we're talking about, it's really a filter. It's an automatic and unconscious acceptance that something is true. It's just the way the world is, and it's how we all sort the world. And when people come in, they're not aware of the limiting beliefs, because the limit of your belief is the limit of your reality. And when I do really deep work with people, it can feel it could feel a little unreality after they're done. They can feel a little spacey, but that's actually a good thing because their world has just been opened up. So I promised I would talk about the heavier diseases out there. So for something like cancer, there's an identity level belief that's going on. So there's an identity level belief deep in their unconscious mind, because if you think about what cancer is and how people think about cancer, there's this thought that it's not me, right? There's something inside me that I made it, by the way, but there's something inside me that is not me. Let's cut it out, let's kill cancer. And the reality of what it is that there's some kind of internal conflict. There's some kind of...
Larry, you the mic. Okay.
There's some kind of internal conflict. There we go. So there's some kind of internal conflict. And just let me know when we're good with the lapel. So some kind of internal conflict that they have that's created this. So there may very well be an environmental cause for cancer. It's usually something that is multi-causal. So when somebody's doing a study, they want to know, well, what particular factor created the cancer? But it could be something they ate over time. It could be some toxicity in their food. It could be something they put on their skin. It could be all of those, many of those, none of those. And there's some pattern of thinking that keeps it there, because we definitely want to treat the physical part of it, and we also want to change the physical conditions that caused it. Because if you don't change the conditions that caused it, guess what? It comes back. The same goes for the mental part of that. If you don't change the beliefs that led to it, and what kind of beliefs that often show up are, so sometimes there's somebody that feels like they're not getting what they want in life. So I see a lot of occurrence of cancer for people that come into my practice that are in midlife. They're in some kind of transition. So, for example, I had a client who came in and her kids had just gone off to college, and she just wasn't sure who she was anymore. So what is that? That is something here about identity that needed to shift. So what is me? What is not me? What am I about? So she went and she got her mastectomy. She went and did all the stuff she needed to do to heal physically. But I wanted to work with her on her beliefs about what it meant next, because she didn't have a compelling future, because all she was a mom, right? That's an identity level belief, right? So who are you besides a mom, right? What else do you want to put out into the world? So sometimes when I'm working with people, it's clearing out the negative stuff, all the cobwebs and the things that contributed to it, and it's also what's next. What do you have to live for and why? So there are beliefs that come along with the actual cancering. And by the way, cancer is what we call an NLP, a nominalization. We're taking a process and turning it into a noun. I often like to take that noun and turn it back into a process. Because if you say, I have cancer, guess what? You are making that an identity level belief. Well, you are cancering, right? There's a process inside of you where there's cells that are not being useful for you right now that need to be integrated. So changing some of the languaging around it, changing the representations in our mind, just like we did with those pictures, can be very useful, to not think of it as this thing that's invading you, that there's just something that's out of balance and needs to be integrated. And people can have beliefs that they get from society, so cancer causes death is a common one, right? I've got cancer, I've just been given a death sentence. Well, you don't know that, right? And you don't have cancer, you are cancering. And so we look at what those beliefs mean. Sometimes people have beliefs around, well, okay, so the prognosis for this type of cancer is 40%. So someone might believe, okay, well, other people can heal, but I can't. So kind of a sort of lack of efficacy belief. So we can go in and change those. Sometimes people have black and white thinking. So if I say, okay, the prognosis is that 55% will die, and they'll say, oh, that's more than half, that's a majority, I'm done, right? And yeah, there's some laughter, but it's also, that's how some of us think, right? So, and then people often have conflicts in life. So there's, I want to lose weight consciously. I don't want to lose weight because it's the only way I can relax, is to come home and have some ice cream. So almost everybody that I work with has some kind of conflict around it. Now, even if, so you might say, okay, for weight or smoking, that makes sense, right? I want to stop smoking. Oh, it's so relaxing to step outside, take some deep breaths, right? Don't take away my cigarettes, it's the only thing I got. Only way I can get away from my husband or wife or work, right? So there's that conflict. Almost always have to deal with conflicts. And you might say, well, you've just been given a diagnosis. Of course you want to heal. Well, what would it mean if I heal? I would then have to do the housework again, right? So it's almost always there. And then we talked about how long, there's a whole bunch of other beliefs. Whether you can heal, how long it will heal, what kind of side effects will I have. Doctor says, take these pills, these are the 10 side effects you may have, and they're internalizing that, right? They're making the big pictures in their mind about all the nasty stuff that's going to happen, so I have to work with them. I do that a lot with chemotherapy, right? So how can you get the benefit of the chemotherapy without believing that you'll have the side effects? So organ language, this is a fascinating one. So we believe when people say stuff like this that it might be metaphors, but often when I'm working with them, it will point towards what's going on in their mind. If someone comes up with stomach pain and I start asking questions like, oh, I just got a new boss, I can't stomach that, but let me tell you about my stomach pain, right? So I made a rash decision. He gives me a pain in my neck. Shoulders, a lot of people think about the myth of Atlas, right? Holding up the world on his shoulders. I've worked with a number of people that have had like frozen shoulders. And then when we work on the mental part and releasing that all of a sudden the shoulder relaxes. So a couple of case studies here. So I had a client that came in. She had tumor and had to have part of her colon removed. And she had had symptoms for the next 7 years after it happened. And she would have these cripplingly painful spasms every time she ate. So her whole life got planned around, when can I eat? When am I going to have spasms? Am I going to have spasms? When is it going to happen? It all seemed to be pretty random. And she'd been to a whole number of doctors, and finally her doctor referred her out for a psychologist or hypnosis, and she called me. And so we started to work on some of the beliefs around what that meant. And the first thing I was curious about was, because it seems so random, it didn't seem to be related to something physical, like, okay, is it after you eat this kind of food, that kind of food? There was really nothing about it. And what we found, the belief was that if I get better, I'm going to go back to my old life, and it was just too crazy. I was so busy taking care of everybody, and I had all these things going on. So this kept her inside. Her life had actually started getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So there are always negative effects of limiting beliefs, but there's always a perceived positive benefit of it. So what I wanted to have her do is not go back to her old life, but come forward into a better life that included what she was trying to get from her old life. And there were a number of other beliefs we worked on. We had to work on, what does it mean if you don't get better? Because sometimes, I don't want to give people false hope, but I want to give them a compelling future, and I want to make it okay that they don't get better. And often that opens up the space to get better. I had a client with stage 1 breast cancer, worked with her on the side effects of the chemotherapy, and then we worked with her around remission. So remission is an interesting word. So remission, so new mission in life, new identity, new something you're going to do once you're done. And then multiple diagnosis, we had to work on some client C beliefs about what disease is, what is actually experiencing. So the final piece here is when somebody's faced with a health crisis, they often have to go through what's called a hero's journey. And this is from the mythology of Joseph Campbell, but there's a story arc that's in everything from Finding Nemo to Star Wars, which is you're busy just going about your life and you don't want anything to change, but a calling comes. That's your diagnosis. You have to accept that you have to heal. You go out on this quest, this journey, which can be multiple doctors and healing and up days and down days, which is facing challenges here, right? There are people that help you. These are the people that help you along your journey, but there's your challenges, your up days, your down days, your remissions, your recurrences. There becomes a transformation and you come out of it on the other side. So you kind of come home the hero. You've learned something, you've become bigger. You live your bigger mission after you've had this health crisis. So thank you, and love to, thank you.
Any questions? We might have time for just one.
Hi, I was wondering what in your life led you to doing what you do now?
I don't know if I can answer that in a few words. Well, I was fascinated by how things worked. I was an electrical engineer for many years. I got fascinated by how people work. And when I took an NLP class and I cured my first phobia in 3 minutes, I was hooked.
All right, let's give Dan a round of applause. I want to thank both presenters. And the next meeting, we're here every third Thursday of the month.